I never thought I'd need to land a helicopter on my front lawn. Not on a lazy Sunday, not in a quiet suburb, not in the pristine picket fence neighborhood of Oakwood Estates, where lawn height was more heavily policed than public safety. But that day, as my father clutched his chest and dropped like a rag doll onto the kitchen floor, the scream frozen on my lips wasn't from the pain of losing him. It was from the absurdity, the sheer madness of watching a woman with a clipboard stand between life and death at the neighborhood gate, barking about visitor registration while a goddamn ambulance idled 20 yards away, blue lights spinning like a cosmic joke. If I had known that buying into this community meant signing over my basic human rights to a woman named Karen with a Napoleon complex and a Bible-thick rulebook, I'd have rented a trailer in a cornfield instead. But back then, 3 months before the heart attack and the helicopter and the headlines, I was just a son returning home. I had been away for 8 years flying medevac helicopters into war zones of both geography and human fragility. From snow-locked Alaskan villages to desert highways painted in blood, I'd seen the worst of life collapse and the best of humanity rise. So when Mom passed and Dad started living alone, I knew I couldn't keep skimming the edges of his life with holiday calls and quick weekend visits. He was getting older, slower, and even though he'd never say it, I could feel it in the space between our silences. He needed me. Or maybe I just needed to feel like someone still did. The housing market was a battlefield, and Oakwood Estates had been a compromise. Close enough to Dad, clean, quiet, safe. It sounded like the American dream, advertised in glossy brochures with drone shots of cul-de-sacs and kids on scooters. But the dream had fine print. The Homeowners Association HOA ruled everything. I remember my first meeting like a surreal job interview I never applied for. I had barely unpacked when Karen Williams extended her hand to me like a monarch greeting a lesser citizen. Her smile was wide, perfect, practiced, but her eyes scanned my jeans like they were a personal insult. "Welcome to Oakwood Estates," she said, voice dipped in syrup but with a sting of vinegar beneath. "I'm the HOA president. You'll want to familiarize yourself with our bylaws." She handed me a 3-ring binder that looked like it belonged in the Library of Congress. I took it with both hands, the way you might accept a baby or a bomb. "Thanks," I said. "I'll give it a look." "Be sure that you do," she replied. Her tone was cordial, but it landed like a command. "We take community standards very seriously." I smiled thinly, already regretting every decision that brought me here. My old neighborhood, the one I'd grown up in, had been messy, loud, alive. Kids rode bikes across lawns. Boats rusted in driveways. Mailboxes were whatever color you found on sale. But here, everything matched lawns, like green velvet cut with surgical precision. Shutters painted only in pre-approved colors. Smiles as tight and manicured as the hedges. Karen was the queen of it all, clipboard always in hand, like a weapon disguised as office supply. The house itself was fine, 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, the same generic charm as every other home on the block. But I wasn't here for architecture. I was here for Dad. Every Sunday, we had dinner, sometimes lasagna, sometimes grilled steaks. He told stories. I listened. And every week, I watched him move a little slower, breathe a little heavier, rub his chest like something inside him was knocking for attention. "Just heartburn," he'd mutter. "Don't start hovering like your mother." But I did hover, quietly, closely. The neighborhood wasn't all bad. Mike and Jen next door had a golden retriever they sneaked out after 9 p.m. because Karen's rulebook of suburban oppression stated no pets outdoors after 8:30. Across the street, retired Colonel Bryant was waging a one-man war against shrubbery regulations, daring to let his hedges exceed regulation height by 2 inches. 2 doors down, Sadi, a kindergarten teacher, had once been cited for sidewalk chalk art. "You'll get used to her," Sadi told me as we watched Karen measuring garbage can placement with a tape measure. "Or, you'll go insane." "Those are the options," I asked. "Pretty much," she said. My first violation arrived like a cease and desist letter from God. 3 weeks in, I was mowing my lawn when Karen's shadow fell over me like an eclipse. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, clipboard at the ready. "Your grass is at nearly 2.5 inches. It must be maintained at precisely 2 1/4 inches." I blinked. "You measured my grass." Weekly inspections are standard, she said, as if the words didn't sound like something out of a dystopian novel. Please adjust your mower blade accordingly. You can't be serious. I assure you, I am. Non-compliance will result in a notice of violation and a fine. She made a note. Also, your mailbox is Admiral Blue. It should be Navy. Section 8, paragraph 2. It came with the house. The previous owners were supposed to repaint before selling. Clearly they did not. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. I'll get right on that, I said. My sarcasm wasted on her. You have 72 hours, she replied. The notices came fast after that, like an HOA blitzkrieg. A garden hose visible from the street. Halloween decorations up 2 days early. Parking in the driveway instead of the garage. An unauthorized wind chime. Every week, a new infraction. My home was becoming a legal battlefield, and Karen was both judge and jury. At some point, it stopped being annoying and started becoming something else. Something personal. It wasn't about grass or wind chimes. It was about control. About watching someone like me scruffy, unconventional, ex-military squirm under the polished boot of suburban order. And I would have endured it, swallowed it, all of it, because my dad lived 2 miles away and his lasagna smile meant more than winning some passive-aggressive turf war. But there's something you should know about people like Karen. They don't stop, not until you draw a line, or in my case, a landing zone. I didn't know it then, but every absurd infraction, every blue mailbox warning and lawn measurement was leading me somewhere, like the slow click of a winding watch, counting down to a moment when everything would unravel, when I would have to choose between playing by the rules or saving a life. And that's the thing about rules, they only matter until they're the reason someone dies. I wish I could say I bought this house to start over. I didn't. I bought it to hold on to something I was afraid to lose. I came back because the world out there was chaos, and this place on paper offered peace. Instead, I found another battlefield, but this one didn't need bullets or bombs. It had clipboards and bylaws, and its greatest weapon wasn't hate. It was apathy wrapped in bureaucracy. And that, more than anything, is what scared me, because you can reason with anger. But indifference, that'll bury you under a rule book before you even realize you're bleeding. So no, I never thought I'd need to land a helicopter in my front yard. But looking back now, maybe it was always going to end that way. Maybe the only way to break a machine is to jam it with something so loud, so undeniable, so airborne, that it drowns out every petty complaint and exposes what really matters. Because in Oakwood Estates, it turns out life was negotiable. But grass length, that was sacred. My second violation came wrapped in an envelope labeled friendly reminder, though there was nothing remotely friendly about its contents. According to the citation, I had violated Section 11, Paragraph 7 of the Oakwood Estates Covenant by displaying unsanctioned seasonal decor prior to the officially approved date. The offense: a small string of Halloween lights, orange and purple, strung across my front porch railing on October 3rd. Exactly 2 days too early. I stared at the letter in disbelief, then at the lights, still unplugged, still innocent, swaying gently in the breeze like cheerful criminals awaiting sentencing. Beneath the warning was a photo, grainy, black and white, time-stamped 6:42 p.m. Karen's early morning surveillance rounds had caught me red-handed. I laughed out loud, a little too hard. My laughter echoed down the perfectly paved street like a crime in itself. It escalated from there. Each week became a new chapter in the absurd novella that was my life under Karen's rule. The front bumper of my truck extended 3 inches past the designated parking line violation. I left a sack of mulch on my porch overnight violation. The replacement house numbers I installed were in Helvetica Neue instead of Times New Roman violation. At one point, I considered printing the HOA bylaws onto toilet paper, just so they'd finally be useful for something. But the worst part wasn't the pettiness. It was the relentlessness, a drip, drip, drip of control that eroded sanity, and she never tired. Karen was the embodiment of tireless, tight-lipped tyranny. One morning I woke to find a fluorescent orange tag zip-tied to my fence post. Unauthorized fencing alteration. It read, I hadn't altered anything. Turns out the wind had blown a plank slightly inward, just enough to cast a shadow that didn't match the original blueprint. Karen had taken aerial photos with a drone. A drone? I didn't even know she had one. When I confronted her, She said it was part of community oversight. I said it was part of a dystopian surveillance state. She blinked, confused. I don't understand the hostility. Mr. Mitchell, she replied, as though documenting my every move was a civic duty and not an obsession. The community, for their part, was divided. Most residents had learned to live under Karen's reign with quiet resignation. Some even defended her, parroting terms like property values and neighborhood standards. But there were others, those who had been burned before, those who carried the invisible scars of 1,000 silent battles. They didn't speak much, but they made eye contact longer than usual when I passed by. As if to say, you too. I began compiling an unofficial tally of HOA infractions among my neighbors. Jen had been fined for using a hose nozzle not on the approved list. Mike once received a written warning for leaving his garage door open for more than 6 minutes while unloading groceries. Sadi got reprimanded when a visiting student drew a rainbow on her driveway with chalk. Defacement of communal visual harmony. The violation read, Colonel Bryant had racked up enough citations to wallpaper a guest bathroom. One night, I found the colonel on his front porch, pruning a hedge with the grim precision of a man slicing through bureaucracy. Did you know, he said without looking up, that in 1971 I led a platoon through a minefield with less resistance than I get from that woman. He gestured toward Karen's house. 3 doors down, she has a laser measuring device now, tracks hedges to the millimeter. He clipped a leaf like it had insulted his family. This isn't about order, he continued. It's about fear. People let her win because it's easier than fighting. But once you start bending, you break. I listened. Not because I needed advice, but because I needed to know I wasn't alone. Later that same week, I received a formal notice regarding auditory disturbances, a fancy way of saying I had been playing my guitar on the back patio past 8 p.m. I hadn't been playing loudly, just quietly strumming, lost in thought, as the sun bled across the sky. But apparently, the sound of unapproved stringed instruments after sundown constituted a potential community disruption. The citation included a recording. I recognized the song something bluesy, slow. It sounded sad. Somehow, Karen had managed to criminalize sadness. Still, nothing prepared me for the deck incident. That was the moment everything shifted. It started innocuously. I noticed the boards on the B deck were rotting in places, soft spots you could feel underfoot, like thin ice. I called a contractor, Tony, an old friend from high school who now ran his own business in town. He showed up the next morning with tools and coffee. We laughed about old times as he pulled up the damaged planks. I was mid-sentence, recalling a disastrous school dance, when we heard the throat clearing. Karen stood at the edge of my yard like the ghost of bureaucracy's past, present, and future. Clipboard in one hand, digital camera in the other. Excuse me, she said, voice clipped like a wire about to spark. Do you have a permit for this construction? Tony looked at me. I looked at her. It's not construction. I said, it's a repair, replacing rotten boards with identical new ones. Any external modification requires HOA approval. She countered. Form 27B to be submitted with specifications, diagrams, and photos. The board meets next month. I said, so I'm supposed to leave a dangerous deck for 3 weeks. You should refrain from using the deck until proper authorization is granted. She said, work must cease immediately. She turned to Tony. I'll also need proof of insurance and a copy of your contractor's license. Tony blinked, stunned. Lady, I've worked in 6 counties in 3 states. This is the first time I've been asked for paperwork to fix a deck. We take safety seriously, Karen replied, scribbling something onto her clipboard. The irony. I muttered. She left. Tony didn't. He finished what he could, muttering under his breath. Man, you live in a damn HOA gulag, he said. Next time your grass sneezes, she's going to fine you for pollution. I laughed, because I didn't know what else to do. 2 days later, I received a $250 fine for unauthorized exterior renovation. A photo of the deck was attached, circled in red like a murder scene. I pinned the letter to the fridge, where it joined the growing collage of madness blue mailbox violations, noise complaints, unregistered Christmas wreaths. Around this time, Dad's health started to visibly decline. He was paler, quieter. He skipped our usual Sunday cookouts, saying he was tired. One night, he called to cancel dinner, and I could hear the rasp in his voice. Just a cold, he said. Don't fuss. But I fussed. I worried. I began keeping my phone at full volume, within arm's reach. I made sure the spare key was under the mat. I memorized his medications, dosages, doctor's number. He didn't know. He didn't have to. Meanwhile, Karen continued her reign. Every morning, I saw her making rounds, clipboard tucked under one arm like a royal decree, tapping on garbage cans, measuring mailbox angles, noting porch light wattages. She walked like a priest administering judgment, her expression somewhere between smug and sanctified. The neighborhood lived in a quiet state of compliance, held hostage by the illusion of order. And me, I played the game. I cut my lawn to 2¼ inches. I repainted my mailbox navy. I even installed motion sensors to ensure my trash bins were never on the curb a minute early. But I wasn't playing to win. I was playing to survive. Because deep down, I knew the system wasn't sustainable. You can only suppress people so long before the quiet turns to resistance, before compliance curdles into contempt. What none of us knew, not even Karen, was that the storm was coming. Not in the form of rebellion or lawsuits or a neighborhood petition. No. It would arrive in the sound of sirens echoing down a private street, in the locked gate that wouldn't open, in the desperate text from a neighbor, in the steady, thumping rhythm of rotor blades slicing through the sky. The absurdity of it all would reach its peak not with a riot or a vote, but with a helicopter landing in the middle of the conformity Karen worshipped. And when it came, it wouldn't be about violations or bylaws. It would be about something HOA protocol called never accounted for humanity. The lasagna was almost done when Dad said, "You're hovering." I looked up from the stove, spoon in hand, caught mid-stir. "I'm not hovering," I said, but even I didn't sound convinced. He was seated at the kitchen table, one hand absently rubbing his chest, the other swirling the last of his iced tea like it held answers. "You've been watching me since I walked in," he said, like I'm gonna burst into flames. I forced a smile. "Just making sure you don't drop dead before dessert." He chuckled, then coughed too deep, too rough. "Morbid much," he said, trying to shake it off. But I saw it. That tiny wince, the subtle way his fingers clenched at his sternum before relaxing again. "You sure it's just heartburn?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. He waved me off. "You worry too much. You always did. Even as a kid, you'd check on me twice a night when I had the flu. And Mom said I had a hero complex." I replied, pulling the lasagna from the oven. The smell of garlic, tomatoes, and melted cheese filled the room like a blanket. I carried it to the table and placed it down between us. "Well," Dad said, adjusting in his seat, "if I have to go out, this isn't a bad final meal." "Don't say that," I muttered. "Too fast." "I'm joking," he said, smiling, but something in his eyes betrayed the effort it took to say it. We ate in silence for a few minutes, both pretending things were fine. Then, just as I was pouring him a second glass of tea, it happened. He put down his fork. Not slowly, not like someone full or pausing for a story. He dropped it. His shoulders slumped. His face turned gray, lips pressing into a thin line of pain. "Dad," I said. He didn't answer. His hand went to his chest, fingers clawing at his shirt like it might tear away whatever was crushing him inside. Then his chair scraped back violently, and he tried to stand. His knees buckled. The glass hit the floor. He collapsed in a mess of limbs and broken sound. "Dad," I was kneeling beside him in an instant, my mind snapping into emergency mode before my heart could catch up. His breath came in sharp, wet gasps. His eyes were open, but they weren't really seeing me. "Stay with me," I whispered, already dialing 911. I'd made 100 calls like this for strangers. Backcountry hikers with broken spines, car crash victims pinned beneath metal, children with fevers too high to speak. But never my father. Never in my own kitchen. 911, "What's your emergency?" My dad collapsed. I said, "Chest pain, trouble breathing. I think it's a heart attack." The dispatcher's voice stayed calm, practiced. I gave the address, listed his medications, did everything right. She asked if I had aspirin. I shoved open the cabinet, found the bottle, lifted his head, slipped the tablet under his tongue. "Ambulance is en route," She said, "Stay with him." I never let go of his hand, even when it went limp, even when the panic crawled into my bones like ice. I kept talking, kept whispering, "You're okay, Dad. You're okay." I didn't even hear my phone buzz, but I saw the screen light up. A text from Jen, my neighbor. 4 words. Karen's blocking the ambulance. My mind refused to believe it at first. I read the message again, then looked out the front window, and there it was. Flashing lights. Stopped. Not moving. Parked at the Oakwood Estates entrance half a block down. And there was Karen, standing in front of the gate, clipboard in hand, gesturing wildly. I could barely see the paramedics behind her, faces lit by the strobing red and blue. My father gasped beside me. That snapped me back. "Mike," I shouted through the open door. My neighbor appeared instantly. "Stay with him." I said, "I need to get that ambulance in here." "Go," he said, already kneeling beside Dad. I ran like the street was on fire, shoes slapping pavement, heart thundering against my ribs. The air sliced at my lungs, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. When I reached the entrance, Karen turned as if I'd interrupted a board meeting instead of a crisis. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, "we have procedures. My father is dying." I screamed, "Move your car." Her Lexus was parked partially across the entrance. The ambulance couldn't squeeze through without scratching it. Karen didn't flinch. "All visitors, including emergency vehicles, must sign in," she said. Section 5, paragraph 3. "Are you out of your goddamn mind?" I shouted. One of the paramedics stepped forward. "Sir," he said to me, "is there another entrance?" "No," I said, eyes locked on Karen. "This is it." "Ma'am," he said, turning to her, "you need to move your vehicle or we'll be calling the police for obstruction. The police understand the importance of protocol." Karen replied, "This neighborhood has standards." That's when I remembered who I was, what I did, and what I had. I stepped away, pulled out my phone, and dialed. "Mike." I said, "It's Jack. I need the chopper." Now, he didn't ask why. 12 minutes. He said, "Oh, clear landing zone." "My front lawn." I said, "Just get here." I hung up. Behind me, a police cruiser pulled up, lights flashing. Karen's face lit up like she'd just drawn a royal flush. "Officer," she began, "I'm maintaining neighborhood security protocols while this man's father is having a heart attack." The paramedic cut in. The officer looked at me. "You're the one who called." "Yes. My neighbors are with my dad now. The ambulance can't get in because she won't move her car." The officer turned to Karen. "Ma'am, move your vehicle, but the sign-in protocol now." He barked. Her face went white. She moved, slowly, muttering. The paramedics jumped back in the ambulance and raced toward my house. I didn't follow them. Instead, I looked at the officer. "I have a helicopter coming," I said. "Medical evac. It's landing in my yard." His eyes widened. "You what?" "I'm a medevac pilot. I'm not risking another delay." The officer nodded, then turned serious. "I'll follow. I'll help secure the area." Karen, halfway to her house, stopped and turned. "A helicopter. You can't do that. There are noise ordinances. Property values, ma'am," the officer said. "I suggest you stay out of this now." By the time we reached my house, the ambulance was already in my driveway. Paramedics were inside, working over my father, wires and monitors and murmured instructions. The neighborhood had awakened. People stood on their lawns, watching. Murmurs rippled down the street like wind. Then, faint at first, the thump of rotor blades, a sound I knew better than my own voice. It grew louder, closer. "They're taking him to Memorial." One of the paramedics told me. "Best cardiac team in the state." "Good," I said. I leaned down. "Dad, hang in there. Help is here." His eyes fluttered open, just long enough to squeeze my hand. Outside, the helicopter descended like a mechanical angel. My crew chief, Rodriguez, jumped down, ducked under the blades. "Mitchell!" he shouted over the noise. "What the hell kind of neighborhood is this? I'll tell you later." I shouted back, "Let's move him." We loaded Dad onto the stretcher and began rolling him across the lawn. Karen appeared again, hair wild from the downdraft. screaming something about bylaws and violations and lawn damage. She's issuing a citation, Rodriguez muttered, almost impressed. Is she for real? She's HOA real, I replied. As we reached the helicopter, she tried to run toward us, clipboard raised like a divine punishment. The officer caught her just before she reached the tail rotor. Ma'am, he said, step back or I will arrest you for interfering with emergency services. You're all getting evicted. She screamed, every one of you. Her voice was drowned out as the blades picked up speed. Rodriguez helped me into the bird. You coming, he asked. I nodded. I'm coming. As we lifted off, I looked back. Karen stood in the middle of the cul-de-sac, arms raised, clipboard high, mouth still moving, but no one could hear her now. Only the sound of wind and life in flight. The flight to Memorial Hospital was just under 7 minutes, but it felt like hours compressed into seconds. My father lay still, strapped down beneath the flurry of medical gear, his chest rising and falling with mechanical rhythm. While the medic beside him adjusted the oxygen and monitored vitals like every tick of the monitor was a lifeline. I sat opposite them, headset pressed tight against my ears, barely breathing. Rodriguez sat in the cockpit, silent, focused, hands steady on the controls like he'd done 1,000 times before, and he had, just not for me, not for my family. This time, it wasn't some stranger plucked from a mountaintop or accident site. This time, it was Dad. I kept looking at his face, at the faint grimace that flickered when the chopper tilted, at the bead of sweat rolling from his temple, hanging at the edge of his jaw. Every small detail became monumental. Every breath felt earned. As the city skyline blurred beneath us, I closed my eyes for a second, just one, and saw it all again, Karen standing at the gate like a gatekeeper of mortality, clipboard held like a sword, rules more sacred than a human life. And I realized then this wasn't just about control. This was about power, misused, unchecked, and deeply embedded into the soil of that pristine neighborhood like an invasive species no one had dared to uproot. When we touched down at Memorial, the trauma team was already waiting on the helipad. The doors slid open, and the night was split by the organized chaos of urgent movement. We wheeled Dad straight into the cardiac unit. I followed behind, my boots echoing against tile floors, fluorescent lights overhead flickering in rhythmic sequence, like a countdown. Within minutes, I was in the waiting room, alone, surrounded by the buzz of machines and the occasional overhead page. I couldn't sit. I paced. I ran my hand over my face again and again. Every time I thought I'd settled down, I saw the moment he felt his fork hitting the table, his knees collapsing. My body remembered it even if my brain tried not to. A nurse came out after what felt like days and told me he was stable, conscious, but would need a stent procedure immediately. I nodded, numb with gratitude. I signed the forms. I waited more. By morning, he was out of surgery, groggy, but alive. When I finally sat beside him, he looked at me, cracked a dry smile, and said, "So, helicopter." Huh. I choked on a laugh. "Don't ever make me do that again. No promises," he whispered. Then his smile faded. "Did they get in time?" "Yeah," I said, gripping his hand. "Barely. Because of her, because she thought the rules were more important." He was silent for a long moment. "And you broke them." "I broke all of them." I said, "And I'd do it again." Back in Oakwood Estates, the fallout began before I even returned. The incident had spread like wildfire, neighbors whispering over fences, emails flying through inboxes, HOA board members scrambling to salvage the narrative. But the truth had already taken root. And truth, like rot, spreads fast once disposed. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, there were people waiting. Not reporters, not officials, neighbors. Mike and Jen stood with Sadi and Colonel Bryant near the edge of my lawn, where the faint circle from the helicopter's skids still marked the grass like a badge of defiance. Someone had left a bottle of scotch on my porch with a note that simply read, "Thank you." I didn't even know who. I didn't need to. Karen, predictably, had already filed a complaint. Several, actually. Emergency HOA meeting notices had gone out, citing violations ranging from unauthorized aerial transport to willful disruption of community tranquility. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday night, I showed up early. I didn't want to walk into a crowd. I wanted to see their faces as they walked into mine. The community center was packed. Not just the board, but almost every resident in Oakwood Estates. Some stood, some sat, all waited. Karen sat at the center, her clipboard replaced by a thick stack of papers, lips pressed into a pale, taut line. Her eyes met mine but didn't blink. This emergency session of the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association is now in session. She began, "We are here to address the extensive violations committed by Mr. Mitchell." She launched into a list: unauthorized landing of aircraft, destruction of common landscaping, noise ordinance breach, failure to file emergency paperwork. Each charge was delivered with surgical precision, her voice cold and brittle. I stood, trying to stay calm. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, addressing the room. "My father had a heart attack. The ambulance was blocked by your president. I did what I had to do to save his life." Karen held up a hand. "Mr. Mitchell, you'll have your turn to speak. Please respect the order of proceedings." "Order," I snapped. The same order that almost killed my father. Murmurs rose across the room. Before Karen could speak again, Colonel Bryant stood. "Point of order," he said firmly. Karen sighed. "Colonel, you're not on the board. I move to dismiss all charges against Mitchell," he said, ignoring her. "You can't do that," she barked. "I second the motion." Sadi called out from across the room. Karen's face turned a deeper shade of crimson. "This is not a mob. This is a legal A." "All in favor?" Brian asked. Hands shot up. Dozens. Almost everyone. Karen banged her gavel. "This is out of order, actually," said Davis, a board member and retired attorney, clearing his throat. "According to Section 17, Paragraph 9, a unanimous vote of attending members can override board decisions on non-structural matters." Karen froze. That's not possible." "I wrote the clause," Davis said softly. "You signed it." The room fell silent. Then Mrs. Chen, another board member, spoke up. "The violations were issued during a medical emergency, during which our president blocked an ambulance." The room erupted. Voices, shouts. A wave of indignation that had been building for years, now crashing over Karen's carefully manicured dam of rules. She tried to speak, to reassert control, but her voice was drowned. Then, from the back, Brenda Mason stepped forward. "If it had been my husband in that ambulance," she said, eyes locked on Karen, "would you have done the same? Would you have made him wait to die while you looked for a signature?" Karen opened her mouth, but nothing came. She looked around, but no one was looking back with support. "Not anymore." Davis cleared his throat again. "I move that in addition to dropping the charges against Mr. Mitchell, we vote on whether Miss Williams shall continue as HOA president." The vote was faster this time, nearly unanimous. Karen sat frozen as the reality sank in. Her reign was over. She left the meeting without another word. By the end of the week, her house was listed for sale. Within a month, Sadi was elected as the new HOA president. The bylaws were reviewed, revised, and rewritten. Emergency protocols were overhauled. Lawn measurements were dropped. Hedges grew freely. Kids chalked sidewalks again. The golden retriever roamed happily after dark. People smiled more, talked more. Oakwood Estates didn't become perfect, but it became human. As for my father, he healed. Slowly, fully. And one sunny afternoon 6 months later, we stood together on the deck, newly rebuilt without a single form filed. He hammered nails with more strength than he probably should have, grinning at the results. He said, "I think landing that helicopter was the best thing that ever happened to this place." I laughed. "Don't make it a tradition. No promises," he said, and kept hammering. 6 months passed. The lawn where the helicopter had landed was still slightly flattened, a ghost of rotor wash etched into the grass like a battle scar. I never fixed it. Neighbors offered advice: sod replacement, raking techniques, fertilizer blends, but I left it as it was. Every time I looked out my window and saw that circular impression, I didn't see damage. I saw a line drawn in the soil. A line that marked the exact spot where control lost to compassion, where fear lost to necessity, and where silence finally gave way to something louder. Life. Oakwood Estates had changed since that night. You could feel it in the air. Sadi, as HOA president, led with an approach more grounded in empathy than enforcement. She rewrote protocols, dismantled unnecessary restrictions, and in her first newsletter even joked, "Your grass can breathe again." Meetings were no longer tense interrogations, but casual gatherings where residents actually spoke to each other like humans. The bylaw about mailbox colors gone. Halloween decor timing, no longer enforced. Noise ordinances, now within reason, not weaponized. Instead of fear, people leaned over fences and laughed. They shared garden tools, exchanged baked goods. Kids rode their bikes down the street without helmet inspections. Colonel Bryant still trimmed his hedges with military precision, but now more out of habit than spite. Even the golden retriever next door had a new leash-free schedule. And no one, not a single person, misted Karen. Her house lingered on the market for a while. Despite 3 price drops, no one seemed interested in inheriting her legacy. That was until a silver SUV pulled up one morning and a woman stepped out. Leather flight jacket, confident stride, sharp eyes that had seen more than suburbia could ever throw at her. Her name was Dr. Elena Ramirez, chief flight surgeon at the county's trauma center. The same trauma center my dad had been rushed to. The same one Rodriguez and I flew missions for. She bought Karen's house without hesitation, moved in with her wife, 2 kids, and a schedule that made Karen's look like a nap chart. When I walked across the street to welcome them, she shook my hand like we were already family. "I heard about your lawn," she said, grinning. "Hell of a story." "It's become neighborhood mythology," I replied. "Apparently I'm part of the HOA's origin reboot." "Good," she said. "We need stories like that. Reminds people what really matters." A few weeks later, another moving truck pulled up down the street. A familiar face climbed out. Derek, fellow medevac pilot. He'd heard from Ramirez, apparently, and decided the neighborhood sounded like his kind of place. I stared at him, incredulous. "You're telling me we now have 3 emergency flight crew households on the same block?" "Looks that way," he shrugged, unloading a toolbox. "Hope that's okay with the HOA." My dad, standing beside me, let out a deep, hearty laugh that echoed across the street. "Son," he said, "if this place gets any more medical, we're going to need a landing pad in every cul-de-sac." That wasn't an exaggeration. Within months, Oakwood Estates unofficially became the neighborhood of choice for first responders, nurses, trauma surgeons, and medics. It wasn't just because of proximity to the hospital. It was because the story had spread, the one about a man who called in a helicopter because a clipboard blocked the road. It resonated, not as a rebellion, but as a reset, as proof that suburban comfort shouldn't come at the expense of decency. That order without humanity collapses under its own weight. Our neighborhood became a symbol, quietly, not televised, not viral in the online sense, but whispered from staff lounges to EMT break rooms. Oakwood, that's the place where the guy landed the bird on his lawn. Right, yeah, that's the place. It became a kind of refuge, a soft landing zone. The HOA even installed an emergency vehicle protocol station at the front gate, not because it was required, but because Sadi thought it would be a good idea. It had a bypass code, a siren override, and a dedicated hotline to the local dispatch. The sign next to it read, "In case of emergency. Break glass figuratively or literally." The humor wasn't lost on anyone. One crisp autumn morning, as leaves began to litter the street, I sat with Dad on the porch. He was back to grilling on Sundays, though now with a chair nearby to sit down between flips. The stent had done its job. His health was stronger, his color better. He smiled more. I handed him a beer and we watched as Derek jogged by, waving, followed by Ramirez's kids riding their scooters, laughing. "Place looks different now," he said. "Feels different." "Because it is," I replied. "People stopped being scared. Not of the rules," he said, "of each other." We sat in silence for a moment. "You know," he added, "that woman with the clipboard, she thought she was protecting something. Order, image, control. But what she was really afraid of was losing relevance." I nodded. She built a kingdom out of measurements and citations. And in the end, it only took a heartbeat to bring it all down. Or almost take one away, he corrected, tapping his chest. "Right," I said. "The weight of it's still real." Later that week, Sadi held her first community block party. It wasn't mandatory. No sign-ins, no checklists, just music, food, and a bounce house that kept partially deflating and sparking panic in the kids before hilarity took over. People brought homemade dishes, shared stories, and somewhere between the cornbread and the lemonade, someone asked me to tell the helicopter story again. I smiled. You sure it's a long one, John? Tell it anyway. They said, so I did. And by the time I got to the part about Karen charging the tail rotor with the citation form waving in the air like a holy relic, half the street was laughing so hard they could barely breathe. But the laughter wasn't just about absurdity. It was about release. Relief. The communal exhale of people who had once walked on eggshells and now danced barefoot on the same streets. As the sun set and lights flickered on across the block, Ramirez leaned over and said, you know, we never did name that lawn landing. I smirked. Karen's runway. Too nice. Derek chimed in. Clipboard field violation zone. Saudi offered. Emergency freedom pad, my dad suggested, raising his cup. We all laughed. No one could decide. Maybe we didn't need a name. Maybe some stories didn't need to be branded or carved in stone. Maybe it was enough that people remembered. Eventually, on Buzauti, Karen's name stopped coming up. She moved into a high-rise in the city, somewhere with an HOA board she didn't control but probably filed grievances against anyway. Someone said she tried to start a residence etiquette committee in her new building. It lasted 3 weeks. I never heard more than that. And I didn't need to. Some people don't change. They just find smaller places to feel large in. But Oakwood Estates, it changed. And it stayed changed. Because once you've lived through a moment where a rule almost cost a life, you don't unlearn that. You start asking better questions. You begin measuring value not in inches of lawn, but in inches of kindness. And you don't need a helicopter landing every time to remember what matters. But it sure as hell doesn't hurt to keep a clear patch of lawn, just in case.